The afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the quiet suburban sprawl nestled near the southern edge of Texas, not far from the Mexican border. It was the kind of heat that settled into the skin, where even the breeze carried the weight of summer. Evie Marlowe stood in the backyard of the Rodriguez residence, her wide-brimmed sun hat shielding her eyes as she observed the joyful chaos of Tommy Rodriguez's 8th birthday party. At 60, Evie retained a timeless grace, a quiet dignity that defied the years. Her movements were gentle, almost careful, as if life had taught her the fragility of every moment. Faint lines carved by time and sorrow etched her face, particularly around her eyes that had scanned thousands of faces over the decades, always hoping, always searching. Walter, her husband of nearly 40 years, stood nearby, exchanging small talk with the other men by the grill. At 62, he carried a weariness softened by routine and resilience. They had arrived earlier, just as they had done for countless neighborhood celebrations over the years, smiling, polite, and always quietly mourning. The candles had been blown out, the cake had been sliced, the children now ran freely, their laughter mingling with the murmured stories of the adults. Evie was half listening to her neighbor Martha's update on her tomato plants when something caught her eye, a flicker of movement at the patio door. A man she didn't recognize stepped outside, holding the hand of a young boy who looked to be around 8 years old. "Sorry we're late," he called out casually, glancing around as if searching for someone to acknowledge their arrival. "Had a bit of a mess back home." Before he could say more, the boy slipped free from his father's grasp and darted into the yard, eager to join the other children. But the moment the child passed by her, Evie froze. His outfit, green checkered overalls with bright yellow straps, paired with a long-sleeved shirt, struck her like a thunderclap to the chest. And that hair, dark, curly, bouncing as he ran. A wave of dizziness swept through her, as if time itself had folded inward. Without a word, driven by instinct stronger than reason, Evie crossed the lawn, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She reached out, gently but urgently, and turned the boy around. "Where did you get those clothes?" she asked, her voice shaking, almost too soft to hear. Her fingers trembled as they moved instinctively toward his curls, as if verifying something too impossible to believe. The boy's eyes widened in alarm. He twisted away, retreating into the safety of familiarity. "Daddy! Daddy!" he cried, his voice high and scared. The man was already moving, concern etched across his face. He reached for his son and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his tone calm but guarded, his body clearly tensed to protect. "She touched me," the boy whispered, pressing himself tightly against his father's side. "She scared me." A flicker of defensiveness passed over the man's face as he stepped between Evie and the child. "Ma'am, what's going on? Why did you grab my son?" Evie's lips parted, but her voice failed her. Her eyes were locked on the boy's outfit, as if her sanity hinged on those yellow straps. "His clothes," she managed. Where did he get them?" "I'm sorry," the man said, confusion hardening into irritation. "Is there a problem here?" Before tensions could rise further, Walters stepped in. He had seen enough from across the yard to understand something had unraveled. He slipped an arm around Evie's shoulders and faced the man with calm authority. "I'm sorry, my wife didn't mean any harm, it's just that outfit. It's nearly identical to what our sons wore." "Sons," the man echoed, his expression easing into puzzled concern. "We had triplets," Walter said gently, pausing to collect himself. "They disappeared 30 years ago, all 3 of them. The last thing they wore before they vanished was a pair of green checkered overalls with yellow straps. Just like that." A hush fell over the backyard. Mrs. Rodriguez, the hostess, stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "It's true. The Marlowe boys, Lucas, Noah, and Gabrielle, disappeared in '81. It broke the entire community. We searched for weeks. The man's defensiveness dissolved into compassion. God, I had no idea, he said, glancing down at his son's outfit with new eyes. I picked these up at a department store a while back. I don't even remember when. Evie, still trembling, stepped forward slightly. Please, may I just look? Just the tag, the brand. Walter gently guided her back. Evie, honey, he's not Lucas, or Noah, or Gabriel. We can't do this. He turned to the man. I'm truly sorry. This has been a difficult day. Mrs. Rodriguez placed a comforting hand on Evie's arm. You're pale, sweetheart. Why don't you go home and lie down? Walter nodded. Yes. That's a good idea. He thanked the hosts, gave a parting nod to the father and son, and helped Evie make their quiet exit. I wish we'd met under better circumstances, the man said softly. I didn't mean to upset anyone. We're new here. Thought this party would be a good way to meet the neighbors. It's not your fault, Walter replied, his voice sincere. As they walked the short distance home, Walter held Evie close, the way a man does when he's trying to hold someone else, and himself, together. Once inside, he eased her onto the sofa and disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a cup of hot tea. Evie wrapped her hands around it, though her fingers felt numb. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I didn't mean to scare that boy, she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of decades. It's just, when I saw those clothes, for a second I thought maybe... Walter sat beside her, gently rubbing her back. I know, he said. It was a panic attack. You were triggered. It's okay. I can't forget them, she sobbed, finally allowing the dam to break. Even after 30 years. Every day. I see them. Walter took her hand in his, squeezing it with the strength of someone who knows sorrow by name. They'd be grown men now, he said softly. They'd have lives of their own. I know, Evie murmured, brushing away tears with the back of her hand. I just feel so ashamed. I keep dragging the past into the present, making people uncomfortable. Walter pulled her close, letting the silence carry what words couldn't. Outside, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across their living room. But inside, something fragile and sacred still flickered. A bond forged not by what was lost, but by the love that endured. We don't have to forget our sons, Walter said firmly, his voice steady but low with a tenderness that only years of grief could forge. He reached across the space between them, placing his hand over Evie's. When I saw that boy's clothes today, I felt it too. The green checkered overalls, the yellow straps, the sleeves so eerily familiar. Evie sat up straighter, eyes still misted but clearer now. I want to see their photos again, she said, her voice gaining strength. The ones where they wore those outfits. Walter hesitated, a shadow of reluctance flickering in his eyes. They're in the attic, in that old box. We haven't touched it in over 20 years. Please, Walter. She pleaded, gently but insistently. If it'll help me understand what happened today, if it'll settle my heart. He sighed, the kind that comes from years of trying to protect someone from pain that refuses to disappear. But he nodded and rose to his feet. I'll get it. Evie listened to his footsteps as they echoed above, followed by the groan of the attic ladder unfolding. She sat still on the couch, staring at her trembling hands resting in her lap as memories crept in like whispers. Moments she had buried deep were rising again, uninvited yet unstoppable. When Walter returned minutes later, he was carrying a weathered cardboard box dusted with time. He placed it on the coffee table and wiped off the layer of age with a dish towel before carefully removing the lid. Together, they leaned in, two parents facing the remains of a life once whole. Inside were the echoes of innocence, Miniature baseball gloves worn soft with use, 3 identical teddy bears, each with one ear slightly chewed, brightly colored homework sheets marked with gold stars, and tiny shoes that had once pounded down their hallway in a synchronized rhythm. Every item was a moment crystallized in grief, untouched, unspoiled, and unbearably precious. "The photo album should be at the bottom," Walter said, his voice catching in his throat. "We packed it last." "I remember." Layer by layer, they unearthed the artifacts of their boy's childhood until the leather-bound album emerged. Walter lifted it like a sacred relic and laid it on his lap. The cover, worn smooth over time, felt almost warm to the touch. They opened it together, leaning shoulder to shoulder in silent reverence. The first pages bloomed with life. 3 identical newborns, pink and squalling in their hospital bassinets. Then came images of first steps, sandy beach adventures, birthday parties filled with lopsided cakes and shared wishes. The boys were always in sync, like 3 notes from the same song, harmonizing effortlessly. "They were always so in tune," Evie whispered, her finger tracing the image of them building a sandcastle, each with a different colored shovel but the same crooked smile. Eventually, they found the photo, the one they both remembered too vividly. The triplets stood outside their front porch, clad in their matching green checkered overalls with bright yellow straps, grinning widely with arms draped across each other's shoulders. Behind their joy, though none could have known at the time, loomed a silent countdown. "This was taken the morning they vanished," Walter said quietly, his eyes fixed on the image. "Exactly an hour before they were gone." Phoebe leaned in, scanning every detail of the photo. "Wait, look at the overalls. The boy from the party, his outfit looked the same, but now that I really look, it's not exact. The shade of green is different, more modern, and the checkered lines, ours are wider." Walter nodded. "The straps, too. Similar idea, but definitely not the same clothes." Evie exhaled slowly, the realization grounding her. "I feel terrible for how I reacted. That poor boy and his father." "What were their names?" "Malvin and Rowan," Walter replied. "They moved in just a few months ago, new to the neighborhood." "I need to apologize," she said. "I must have scared that child." They sat in silence for a beat longer, then began reminiscing. Evie recalled how Gabriel had insisted on wearing his overalls backward that morning, laughing proudly at his rebellion until she convinced him otherwise. Walter chuckled softly at the memory of Noah getting a grass stain on his knee before breakfast, always the adventurous one. Walter reached to pour another cup of tea, but Evie suddenly grabbed his arm, nearly causing a spill. "Walter, look! The background of the photo. Isn't that the Cadillac? The one Lucas was obsessed with?" Walter squinted. At the edge of the frame, partially obscured, was the distinct reddish-brown nose of a Cadillac. "You're right," he said, surprised. "That's Mr. Howard Fielding's car. Lucas used to go nuts every time he saw it." Evie's voice sharpened with urgency. "Mr. Howard, their school teacher. He rarely drove it. Said it was his prized possession. Everyone in the school knew that car. And the kids loved him," Walter added. "He was a gentle soul. We were a close community then. Tighter than now." Evie flipped the photo over, searching for a date or note. "Are we absolutely sure this was taken the morning they disappeared?" Walter nodded. "Yes, it's etched in my mind." "But that's strange," Evie said slowly, her brows knitting. "Howard moved away a week before the boys vanished. We even threw him a goodbye party at the school, remember?" Walter's expression darkened. "You're right. He did leave town. But if that's his car in the photo," he rummaged through the box again and pulled out a yellowing Kodak envelope. Inside were the negatives, The processing date was printed clearly. He showed it to her. 2 days after they disappeared. These were definitely taken that morning. A chill swept through Evie's body despite the warmth around her. If that really is his car, then he might have still been around. Maybe he saw something. But the police never mentioned interviewing him. Maybe they didn't, Walter said softly. Maybe they thought he had already moved. Evie stared at the photo again as if the truth might crawl out from its corners. But if he hadn't left yet, why didn't he say anything? Why didn't anyone notice? Walter placed a calming hand on her shoulder. Honey, it could be a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't his car. Or maybe it belonged to a visitor. The police reviewed all these photos, remember? We knew every neighbor, every car, Evie insisted. We would have noticed a strange Cadillac. Walter offered her another sip of tea, his presence a steady anchor in a sea of resurfacing doubt. She took it with shaking hands. "You're right," she said after a pause. "It's probably nothing." Walter exhaled, relieved, and began gently placing the items back in the box. Each one now seemed heavier than before, fragile fragments of 3 lives that had once filled their world. As they finished, Walter glanced at the clock on the mantel and jolted to his feet. "Oh God, my checkup. It's already 11:30 and the clinic closes early on Saturdays." Evie looked up, startled. "I completely forgot." Dr. Matthews hates late patients. Together they scrambled, gathering his insurance card, his pill log, and the small leather journal where he tracked his blood pressure like a sacred ritual. Within minutes, Walter was at the door, coat in hand. "You sure you'll be okay?" "I'll be fine," Evie assured him. "I'll eat something, maybe nap a little. Dinner will be ready when you're back." Walter nodded and leaned down to kiss her forehead. As he stepped outside, neither of them noticed that the photograph Evie had removed from the album, still clutched in her lap, now held more questions than answers. And somewhere beneath the surface of the past, something long buried had just started to stir. Walter gave her a reassuring nod, kissed her gently on the cheek, and hurried out to the car. As the sound of the engine faded down the street, Evie sat still for a moment, the house unusually quiet, the weight of lingering memories settling heavily in the silence. She rose slowly and walked to their bedroom, her footsteps soft on the carpet. Reaching for her phone on the nightstand, she noticed a new text message flashing on the screen. It was from Louise Mitchell, an old friend and former school board administrator who had retired after nearly 30 years of service. The message read, "Annual school district retiree reunion coming up next month. Hope to see you and Walter there. We all miss you too." Evie's breath caught. Louise had known Howard Fielding, probably better than most. She had worked in administration during his entire tenure at Oak Ridge Elementary. If anyone could recall where he'd gone after leaving the school, it was her. A strange unease prickled at the back of Evie's mind. She didn't want to doubt Howard, not the kind, soft-spoken teacher who had once been so beloved by children and parents alike. But the image of that Cadillac in the background of the photograph lingered, like a specter refusing to be ignored. Without allowing herself more time to second-guess, she tapped Louise's contact and pressed call. "Evie?" Louise answered, surprised and warm. "What a lovely surprise. Did you get my message about the reunion?" "I did," Evie replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her voice. "Walter and I will try to make it. How've you been?" "It's been too long." They spent several minutes exchanging updates, chatter about mutual friends, grandkids, the ailments that come with age. Evie listened, nodding, but her heart drummed with anxious purpose. When the pleasantries began to fade, she gently redirected the conversation. "Louise, do you remember Howard Fielding? He taught at Oak Ridge in the early 80s. "Howard? Of course I do," Louise said warmly. "He was one of our best, bright, compassionate. The kids absolutely adored him. Why?" Evie tried to sound casual. Do you know where he ended up? I recall he moved out of town to teach elsewhere, but I can't remember the details. There was a pause, then Louise's tone shifted slightly. Actually, Evie, I think that might be a mix-up. Howard didn't transfer to another public school. He never submitted paperwork for a transfer. Not to another district, not even another state. Evie blinked, sitting up straighter. He didn't? But he told us he was moving for a new teaching job. We even threw a farewell party. That's not quite how it happened, Louise replied gently. If I remember correctly, he told folks he was leaving for something new, but it wasn't a school job. From what I heard after he left, he moved to a remote part of Texas and started some kind of charity farm for immigrant children. A farm? Evie repeated, the word feeling out of place in the Howard she remembered. Yes, I think it was a personal project. He always had a soft spot for helping kids. Someone mentioned the name of the place to me not long ago. Oh, what was it? Louise paused, thinking. Ah, got it. Howard's Haven for Hope. Evie repeated the name to herself, imprinting it into her memory. Howard's Haven for Hope. Louise hesitated, then added, Why are you asking about him all of a sudden? Evie swallowed. I just remembered he had that Cadillac. I saw one that looked identical in an old family photo. It brought back a lot. Oh yes, he adored that car. Louise chuckled softly. But he rarely drove it, said it was more for show than for errands. He had a second vehicle he used for daily things. That Cadillac was his pride. Do you remember when exactly he left town? Evie asked, her voice now tinged with a sense of urgency. Louise exhaled. It's been so long I can't say for certain. Sorry, dear. After the call ended, Evie moved quickly, her thoughts churning. She walked to their modest home office and turned on the old desktop computer. Fingers trembling slightly, she typed in Howard's Haven for Hope. A basic website loaded. Nothing flashy, just a simple interface with a banner image of young men and boys working cheerfully on a farm. They looked happy. Most appeared to be of Mexican or Central American descent, with tanned skin and dark hair. The site's gallery showed them harvesting vegetables, fixing irrigation lines, reading books under a shady tree. Howard himself appeared in a few pictures, older now, but unmistakably him, still with the gentle eyes and warm smile that had once charmed generations of students. The farm's mission statement detailed a commitment to supporting immigrant youth through mentorship, education, and a self-sustaining environment. The biography on Howard's profile mentioned his years as a teacher and his lifelong passion for helping children build better futures. Everything about it seemed wholesome, good, honest. Evie found an address, buried near the footer of the website. No phone number, just an email. She copied the address onto a piece of paper, her decision forming faster than she could fully process it. She glanced at the clock. 11:45 a.m. If she left within 15 minutes, she could reach the farm by early afternoon. She needed to see Howard in person, to ask about the Cadillac, to show him the photo, to look him in the eye. She picked up her phone and dialed Walter. Hey, sweetheart, he answered. Still in the waiting room? Everything okay? She asked. Just routine stuff. Why? I found something interesting, she said, launching into a quick summary of her call with Louise and what she had discovered about Howard's charity farm. You want to go there? Today? Walter sounded surprised, hesitant. Yes, she said firmly. I think I need to. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it might ease my mind to talk to him, see what he's doing, ask about the Cadillac. Walter hesitated. Evie, I'm a little worried. This feels intense. You're putting a lot of weight on something that might be coincidence. I know, she replied softly. I'm not trying to accuse him. I just want to ask. Maybe it'll give me closure. He sighed. All right, but let's be smart. We should call ahead. Let him know we're coming. I didn't see a phone number, only an email. I'll send a message, but there's no guarantee he'll see it in time. They decided to meet at the clinic. Walter would finish his appointment, and Evie would take the bus over to join him. Together, they'd drive to the farm. I'll leave now, Evie said, grabbing her purse. See you soon. As she stepped out the front door, the photograph tucked safely in her handbag, a new current of purpose surged through her. Something had shifted, and though she couldn't yet name it, she sensed that what lay ahead might finally illuminate the shadows of a past too long left in darkness. Evie stepped out of the house with a clarity of purpose that hadn't visited her in years. She locked the front door, took one last glance at the porch where her boys used to play, and then began walking briskly down the street toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. The Texas sun had intensified since morning, baking the sidewalks in shimmering waves of heat. Sweat gathered at her temples, but she didn't slow. Her heart was racing, but not from the weather. It was the memory, the possibility, the photograph. Just as she approached the corner, the bus groaned to a stop in front of her, the doors swinging open with a hiss. Evie climbed aboard and found a seat by the window, her thoughts swirling. She replayed every word from her call with Louise, every image from Howard's website, every detail in that picture of the red Cadillac. As the bus rattled down the road, her mind kept looping one question. What if I missed something all these years? What if the truth was always just out of reach? The 15-minute ride to the medical clinic passed in a haze. As she stepped off, a cheerful young woman in a straw hat and a bright yellow t-shirt thrust a colorful flyer into her hand with a wide grin. County Agricultural Fair this week, she chirped, already moving on to the next passenger. Evie glanced down at the flyer as she walked. It was saturated with cheerful fonts and vivid illustrations. A week-long rural celebration, livestock showcases, crop competitions, carnival food, and craft booths. Today's highlight, a special agricultural auction just a few miles from Howard's farm. She folded the flyer and slipped it into her purse, heart quickening again. Inside the clinic, Walter was finishing up at the cashier's desk, sliding his insurance card back into his wallet. Perfect timing, he said with a smile. Dr. Matthews says everything's fine. My blood pressure's down since the medication switch. Evie let out a soft breath. That's such good news, she said, genuinely relieved. Are you ready for our little road trip? Moments later, they were in Walter's sedan, the GPS guiding them through a patchwork of suburban sprawl that slowly gave way to rolling farmland. Golden fields stretched out beneath a wide, cloudless sky. As they drove, Evie pulled out the flyer. Still no reply to the email, she said, scrolling her inbox again, then holding up the flyer. But, look, this fair is happening right near Howard's farm. Today they're having a big auction. Think he might be there? Walter glanced at the flyer. If they're running a stall for their charity, he probably is. Let's stick to the plan and visit the farm first. We can swing by the auction afterward if we need to. Nearly an hour later, the paved roads had narrowed into dusty lanes, and finally a gravel path appeared, marked only by a hand-painted sign, Howard's Haven for Hope. They turned in, following the long drive to a modest but well-kept cluster of buildings. Whitewashed barns, a weathered farmhouse, and a dormitory-style residence with colorful curtains in the windows. It was quiet, no bustling activity, no children laughing in the distance, just the rustle of wind through tall grass and the hum of distant cicadas. A young man emerged from one of the barns as they parked. He looked to be in his early 20s, with warm brown eyes and a calm, friendly demeanor. "Hello there," Walter called, raising a hand in greeting. "Hi," the young man replied, walking over. "Can I help you?" "We're looking for Howard Fielding," Evie said, stepping forward. "Is this his farm?" "Yes, ma'am. This is his place," he confirmed. "Do you have an appointment?" Walter shook his head. "Not exactly. We're old friends. Howard was our son's teacher years ago. We emailed, but I'm guessing it didn't reach him. Oh, the old website email? Yeah, we're switching over to a new system. The site hasn't been updated yet, the young man said apologetically. Mr. Fielding isn't here at the moment. Most of our staff and kids are at the county fair. There's an auction, and we've got a booth there. Evie tried not to let her disappointment show. She had hoped for a quiet, face-to-face conversation. That makes sense, she said, glancing toward the barns. Walter placed a hand on her arm. Since we're here, do you think we might look around a bit? We'd love to see the work Howard's been doing. The young man nodded. Let me check with the supervisor. He stepped aside, made a quick phone call, and returned, smiling. All good. I'll give you the tour. Over the next 30 minutes, they walked the grounds. He showed them the greenhouses, the livestock areas, and the modest classroom setups inside the dormitory. He explained how the farm provided food and education to children of undocumented immigrants, kids who often had no other place to go. This barn's one of our special ones, he said, stopping in front of a bright building covered in murals and finger-painted flowers. It's for the youngest kids, to explore, get messy, feel safe. Inside, the scent of hay mixed with crayons and glue. At a cluster of low tables, a man was arranging materials for craft activities. He looked up and smiled, revealing an unusually broad, warm grin. Ferdinand, these folks knew Mr. Fielding back when he was a school teacher, the guide explained. Ferdinand wiped his hands on a towel and extended one. Nice to meet you. I'm the activities coordinator. Been here most of my life, actually. Mr. Howard took me in when I was 6. Evie's gaze didn't leave him. His thick, black, curly hair, the way his mouth curved when he smiled, it sparked something deep, something that didn't make sense. A flicker of recognition without context. You grew up here? She asked. Yes, ma'am. I owe Mr. Howard everything. This place saved my life. He walked them around the room, pointing out stations for the upcoming demonstrations. We've got sensory bins, crafts, and gardening stations. We want the kids, and the donors, to see what hands-on learning can do. Evie wandered toward a far wall covered in children's artwork. She smiled at a construction paper scarecrow, a lopsided collage of a barn. But then, one drawing made her stop. A red Cadillac, detailed, polished, its features perfectly captured in colorful grains of rice and dried oats. It was more meticulous than the others. It's a car, she murmured, pointing. Mr. Howard's. He used to treasure that thing. Ferdinand stepped beside her. Yeah, he still does. Drove it out this morning, actually. That drawing's mine. I made it as a model for the kids to follow. He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. They made theirs messy. I went a little overboard. Evie stood frozen. That wide smile, the dark curls, his hands, how he moved them when he talked, the cadence of his voice, her stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Her familiar, or both. She stared longer than she meant to. Ferdinand noticed, shifting under her gaze. Man, is something wrong? Walter gently placed a hand on her back, subtle but firm. No, she said quickly, blinking. Sorry, just... All these little crafts remind me of my boys, when they were young. But even as she smiled, her heart pounded louder in her chest. Because somewhere behind Ferdinand's eyes, she thought she saw a flicker of something impossible. A piece of her past staring back. Evie hesitated, her eyes lingering on Ferdinand's familiar smile. Then, almost without realizing it, she asked softly, Do you have any siblings? Ferdinand looked up, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone. Evie. Walter's voice came low, gentle, but warning. Ferdinand gave a short, awkward laugh. Yeah, I do, actually. My brother's at the event today with Mr. Howard. He's helping run our charity booth. He glanced down at his watch, clearly checking the time. You should definitely check it out if you've got time. There's a kid's performance and an auction, too. Evie smiled politely, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. They thanked him for the tour, and their young guide began leading them back to the main entrance of the property. As they walked, Evie looked over her shoulder one last time. The barn where they had just stood now seemed to pulse with mystery. Her mind was alight with half-formed questions, connections she hadn't dared piece together aloud. Back at the car, she fastened her seatbelt with shaking hands. Walter started the engine and checked his phone for directions. The auction site's only about 20 minutes from here. Do you want to go? Absolutely, Evie replied, the words slipping out like a vow. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with determination. As they bumped along the dusty country road, the silence between them was thick. Walter kept his eyes forward. Why did you ask Ferdinand if he had siblings? Evie stared out the window, watching miles of open land blur past. It was the drawing, she said quietly. That Cadillac he drew. It wasn't just good, it was intimate. And then, his smile, his hair, the way he used his hands when he spoke. She turned toward Walter, eyes wide. He reminded me of Lucas. Walter let out a breath, not unkindly but firm. Evie, I know this is hard, but a smile, some curly hair, it's not enough. Ferdinand is not Lucas. I know, she said, her voice a notch softer. I know. I'm sorry. It shook me. That familiarity. Walter reached over and gave her hand a light squeeze, then turned back to the road. They said nothing more. The silence was no longer tense. It was reflective, cautious, even mournful. When they arrived at the county fairgrounds, the atmosphere was a jarring contrast to the solemn tone of their journey. Colorful tents flapped in the breeze. Children laughed as they raced between livestock displays and food stalls. Tractors gleamed under the afternoon sun. Looks like the auction's already over, Walter observed, scanning a large event schedule pinned to the entrance post. They moved slowly through the fairgrounds, taking in the vibrant displays and cheerful noise. Evie's eyes moved quickly, searching for what she wasn't sure. 10 minutes later, she spotted it, a white tent with a bold blue banner that read Howard's Haven for Hope. Her breath hitched. Standing just in front of the booth, engaged in conversation with a well-dressed couple, was Howard Fielding. Despite the 30 years that had passed, Evie recognized him instantly. His once brown hair had turned to soft white, and his face was lined with age, but the way he moved, his expressive gestures and bright eyes, was unmistakable. They waited respectfully until the couple left, then Walter stepped forward. Miss Fielding? Howard turned, his expression friendly but blank. Yes, can I help you? You probably don't remember us, Evie said, stepping beside Walter. I'm Evie Marlowe, and this is my husband, Walter. Our sons, Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel, were your students at Oak Ridge Elementary. Howard's brow creased as he studied their faces. I'm so sorry. It's been a long time. I'm almost 70 now, he chuckled, tapping the side of his head. This old memory's not what it used to be. He stepped a little closer. I helped organize your farewell party, remember? With the other moms? You once joked about how my boys followed me like little ducklings everywhere. Recognition flickered in Howard's eyes. Then came a slow, nostalgic smile. Of course. The Marlowe triplets, bright boys, all three. I'm very glad to see you again. We were surprised to learn about your farm, Walter said. It's impressive. Howard nodded. It's been my passion project for years now. As the conversation drifted toward the past, his expression dimmed. I heard what happened to the boys, a terrible tragedy. I was heartbroken when I found out. Evie kept her tone steady. I always thought you moved out of state to teach elsewhere. No, Howard replied. I stayed in Texas, moved to a quieter town, got my certification, and started planning this place. Evie leaned forward just slightly. Do you remember exactly when you left town? Was it before or after they disappeared? Howard didn't hesitate. Before. Definitely before. Otherwise the police would have spoken to me, I'm sure. Evie reached into her purse and slowly pulled out the photograph. I looked at this today. It was taken the morning the boys disappeared, just an hour before. She pointed to the edge of the frame. Walter stepped forward. That Cadillac. Was that yours? Howard looked down at the photo. His smile faded. His shoulders stiffened. I can't say for certain, he said after a long pause. I don't remember driving in that area that day, or seeing your boys. He handed the photo back. It must have belonged to someone else. Walter gave a polite nod, placing a firm hand on Evie's shoulder. Well, at least now we know. But Evie wasn't so sure. She noticed Walter's fingers tightening around her arm. He was tense, more than before. Howard's face was unreadable. Do you think the Cadillac is related to their disappearance? We don't know, Walter answered. We only just noticed it in the photo this morning. Howard checked his watch. It's almost 3:30. We're closing down soon. There's a children's performance in 5 minutes. You should watch. It's quite sweet. They thanked him and began walking away. Evie lingered slightly behind Walter, her ears pricking at a sharp, low voice behind her. Howard. She turned discreetly and caught the tail end of his phone call. Leave immediately after the performance. Get Diego here. Yes, now. Evie froze. Her skin turned cold. She hurried to catch up with Walter, her breath shallow. As they reached the small stage, children had begun gathering for the final performance. They looked between 6 and 9 years old, a cheerful chorus singing in Spanish as they stood on the wooden platform. Evie tried to focus, but her gaze drifted, scanning the crowd, searching. Then, movement. From behind the stage, a man emerged, walking quickly, almost urgently toward the vendor tents. His build, the way he moved. It all rang a bell, but it was his hair that made Evie's pulse spike. Thick, black, curly. Walter, she whispered, clutching his arm. That man, the one walking away, doesn't he look like Ferdinand? Walter followed her gaze, his brows lowered, squinting. Yes, he said slowly. The resemblance is striking. Do you think they're twins? Evie asked, barely containing her voice. Before he could respond, she was already moving, dodging through spectators with Walter hurrying after her. They circled behind a cotton candy booth, careful to stay out of sight. The man, now at Howard's tent, was speaking animatedly to Howard Fielding. Then he turned. Evie gasped softly. It was like seeing Ferdinand again. But not. The same wide, familiar smile, the same curls, the same hands gesturing with youthful energy. She leaned in toward Walter, her voice barely audible. Diego, she said. Diego, the one Howard just called. Walter's face had gone pale. He couldn't take his eyes off the man with the unmistakable curly black hair and that familiar, almost haunting smile. The same smile, same curls, Evie whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hand clutched Walter's forearm as if it was the only thing grounding her in that moment. Lucas always had that smile. And remember Gabriel? He had the smaller build, the narrower eyes. Noah had that thick brow, always moving, always agile, even though he was the calmest of the three. Walter nodded slowly, the storm of recognition building in his expression. They watched from a distance as Howard and the man they now believed to be Diego abruptly ended their conversation. Howard gestured with urgency, and together they turned, walking quickly toward the parking lot. Other staff members at the tent exchanged confused glances, clearly unaware of what was happening. "Why are they leaving so fast?" Evie asked, the urgency rising in her voice. "We need to follow them. I have to talk to that man." She started forward, but Walter reached for her arm. "Evie, wait. If those two are Lucas and Noah, then where's Gabriel? Let's be sure. If he's nearby, we can call the police. Let them handle this." Evie hesitated, her chest tightening with indecision. After a moment, she nodded. "You're right, and we know where the farm is if we need to go back. But we need to move, now." They began to scan the fairgrounds, weaving through the maze of tents, booths, and families, peeking behind structures, searching for a third man. Someone who might complete the trio. But there was no sign of another man with the same features. "Maybe we're wrong," Walter said, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. He didn't believe it any more than she did. But Evie's resolve hardened. She turned back toward Howard's booth, where only one person remained, a man in his 60s, sun-weathered and busy folding chairs and loading boxes. "Excuse me," Evie said, working to keep her tone steady. "We visited the farm earlier today and met Ferdinand. Then we saw another man who looked just like him. Diego, I think." "Are they brothers?" The man looked up and smiled. "Yes, ma'am. They're twins." Evie froze, exchanging a look with Walter. "Twins?" she repeated, her voice catching. The man chuckled warmly. "Well, here's a fun fact. They're actually triplets. The third one's not here today. He works at Mr. Howard's private estate, not far from the farm." Evie and Walter stared at each other, shock and a strange, fragile hope battling for dominance on their faces. "Where is this estate?" they asked at the same time, their voices overlapping in an almost eerie unison. The man blinked, clearly surprised by their sudden intensity. "I'm sorry," he said cautiously. "I can't give out that kind of information. It's private, but here's a brochure," he added, handing them a folded pamphlet. "That has the main farm address and some program details." Walter accepted it with a tight smile. "Thank you." They walked away quickly, ducking behind a nearby stall. "Walter." Evie's voice trembled as she clutched the brochure. "Triplets. They're triplets. And they're 36, the exact age the boys would be." Walter dragged a hand through his hair, his face stricken. "This can't be coincidence. The Cadillac in the photo, Howard's weird reaction, now these three men." "Evie," he swallowed. "What if we really found them?" Evie's eyes filled with tears. Haven't. They rushed toward the parking lot, but Howard and Diego were gone. No sign of them anywhere. Walter jumped into the driver's seat and fired up the engine. "We're going back to the farm," he said, jaw clenched. "That's where they'll go." Evie pulled out her phone and dialed 919 and 11. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "My name is Evie Marlowe. 30 years ago, our 3 sons, triplets, vanished from our home in Texas. Today, I believe we found them." Within moments, she was speaking to Detective Martinez from the Missing Persons Unit. She recounted everything: the photograph, the red Cadillac, Howard Fielding, Ferdinand, and Diego, and the revelation that they were triplets, that the third one, Marco, was reportedly at a private estate owned by Howard. "I understand," Martinez said calmly, "but I need your promise. Don't confront Howard or the men alone. We're coordinating with the local sheriff. Stay out of sight until we arrive." Walter turned onto the gravel road toward the farm. "We're almost there." "Good," said Martinez. "Maintain a safe distance. This is sensitive. The man you're describing was a respected member of the community, but if what you're saying is true, we need to proceed carefully." They parked behind a cluster of trees, far from the main building but with a clear view. Time slowed to a crawl. A single vehicle was still parked near the house. Then, the front door opened. 3 figures emerged: Howard, Ferdinand, and Diego. "They're leaving," Evie whispered into the phone, her pulse hammering. "They're loading bags into the trunk now." "Stay put," Martinez ordered. "We're issuing warrants. 2 patrol cars are minutes away." As Howard's car backed down the driveway, red and blue lights suddenly flared across the gravel. 2 sheriff's vehicles blocked the exit. "They're here," Evie said, watching in awe as deputies stepped out, hands near their weapons. Howard stepped out of the vehicle, arms raised, his face drawn tight with fury and disbelief. Ferdinand and Diego followed, their confusion genuine. A deputy spoke with Howard, who pointed back toward the house, waving his arms. "They're hesitating," Walter murmured. "He must have a reputation here." Indeed, they could hear pieces of the conversation carried on the wind. Charity, good man, must be a mistake. Evie could take no more. She grabbed the photo from her purse, her fingers trembling. "They're going to let him go." Evie would, but she was already out of the car, walking with purpose. "Howard Fielding," she called out, her voice sharper than it had been in years. Everyone turned. The deputies stepped forward. "Man, please return to your vehicle." "No," she said firmly, lifting the photograph. "If you're even considering letting this man go, then you need to see this." And she held up the image like a holy relic. "These are my sons, Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel Marlowe. They vanished in 1981. She turned to Ferdinand and Diego, her hand trembling as she pointed. "And here are 2 of them, right here, standing in front of you." Ferdinand's eyes widened. He stepped forward, taking the photograph. Diego leaned in beside him. That's us," Fedon said softly. "That's me and Marco." A deputy stepped closer. "There's a 3rd brother?" They both nodded. Howard's voice cut through the moment, loud and offensive. "I did nothing wrong. I saved those boys. They were abandoned, left behind." Evie's voice cracked, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They were not abandoned. They were taken from our front yard. They were our sons." She broke down, the pain of 3 decades unraveling in one tidal wave of emotion. And for the first time in 30 years, she wasn't crying alone. Ferdinand stepped toward her. "I need to call Marco." Evie's hand trembled as she pointed to the faded photograph. "That's your Cadillac, isn't it, Howard?" she said, her voice cutting through the charged air. "The same one you still keep hidden in the garage?" Howard's lips tightened, but he said nothing. His jaw worked furiously, as though chewing words he couldn't bring himself to speak. "It's still there," Diego said quietly, his eyes not leaving the photo. "In the garage behind the main house. He still has it." Ferdinand turned toward Evie and Walter, something raw and desperate blooming in his eyes. "Are you really our parents?" Evie choked back a sob. "Yes," she and Walter said in unison, the word trembling through her tears. "We are. We never went to prison. That man has been lying to you your entire lives. But you've grown so much, just like we always believed you would." Diego's voice cracked. "We're 36 now. That's how old we'd be." Evie stepped forward. "You were born on February 15th, 1975. Around them, the deputies had grown quiet, listening. Then the senior officer stepped in with calm authority. "Mr. Fielding," he said firmly, "turn around. Place your hands behind your back. You are now the primary suspect in a 30-year-old kidnapping investigation." Howard's shoulders slumped. He didn't resist. As the handcuffs clicked shut, another officer spoke into his radio, signaling the execution of the search warrant for Howard's estate. The peaceful farm turned chaotic as cruisers rolled up, their lights bouncing off the farmhouse walls. Forensics teams swept through buildings. Detectives interviewed staff members. In the garage, they found Cadillacs, once redderant paint faded but unmistakably the same car from the photo. In Howard's office, locked in a drawer, they discovered the original license plate and forged identity documents for all three boys. "Thank you. They should be Lucas, Noah, and Gabrielle," Evie said softly to the detectives as the evidence was tagged. "Ferdinand is Lucas. I know that smile anywhere. Diego is Noah, and the third, Marco, that's Gabrielle," Walter added quietly. "They're not even Mexican. We have mixed ancestry, which probably made it easier for them to pass as Hispanic." When asked about their third brother, Ferdinand explained, "Howard always kept Marco at his private estate. He takes care of the younger kids there, mostly orphans. He told us we were rescued," Diego added, his face a study in disbelief. "Said our parents were criminals who went to prison for life. We were so young, we believed it." The detective leaned forward gently. "What did he do to you?" Ferdinand looked down. "In the last 20 years. Not much. But our childhood," he hesitated. "It was strict, punishing." Diego added softly, "He'd discipline us, make us undress, touch us, hit us with a rattan cane. He said we were bad boys, that we deserved it, especially me." The shame in his voice broke something in Evie. She wanted to run to him, to cradle the man who was still, in so many ways, her lost son. As twilight fell, a call came through from the estate. A detective spoke into his radio, then turned to Evie. They found Marco, along with 8 other children, ages 4 to 10. "They're safe but frightened. We're moving them to the hospital now." Evie's voice cracked. "How is he, Marco?" "He's confused," the officer said, "but physically well. We've explained the situation. All 3 will be brought to the station. You'll see them soon." The ride to the police station was quiet. Evie and Walter sat in the back of a patrol vehicle, their fingers entwined like they had been on the day their sons were born. Ferdinand and Diego followed in separate cruisers. Behind them, the farm faded into the dark, a place that had masqueraded as a haven, but had been a prison for decades. At the station, under the harsh light of the interview room, Ebe sat across from Detective Martinez, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee. "Our neighborhood was safe back then," she began quietly. "Howard was the boys' favorite teacher. He was loved, trusted. He used to give kids rides home. With permission, of course." She described the day they vanished. "Walter and I were both home, but it was a different time. We let them play out front, just for a little while. One moment they were there, and the next they were gone." "No screams, no struggle?" Martinez asked gently. "No," she whispered, "just silence." Walter joined the room, listening as the detective continued. "We questioned Howard. After some resistance, he confessed. He said he felt a special bond with the triplets, that he planned the kidnapping, lured them with ice cream, used the Cadillac as bait." Evie nodded, her face drawn with grief. "Lucas adored that car," Martinez continued. "Howard had already packed essentials, forged papers, crossed county lines, bought land under a false LLC, built a new identity." "But why?" Walter asked, incredulous. "He lost his family, wife, and twin sons in a house fire in the 70s. Our psychologists believe it triggered a severe break. He came to believe certain children belonged to him." Evie stared ahead, tears in her eyes. "He convinced them we were criminals, that we were gone." Martinez nodded. "He showed them fake photo albums, rewrote their history, indoctrinated them. They were only 6. They didn't stand a chance." Finally, Walter leaned forward. "What now?" "Howard will face charges: kidnapping, child abuse, false imprisonment, identity fraud. The children from his estate are being identified. We'll do everything we can to reunite them with their families." He paused, then smiled. "But I believe there are 3 people who've waited long enough." He stepped out, A moment later, the door opened. Ferdinand, Diego, and Marco. They stepped in hesitantly, 3 grown men, but Evie saw them instantly, the wide smile, the thoughtful eyes, the smallest frame. Her sons. The room froze. 30 years collapsed in on itself. Evie stood. "My boys," she whispered. Lucas moved first. He crossed the space in 3 long strides and wrapped his mother in his arms. Noah and Gabrielle followed, and then Walter joined, completing the circle. 5 people, bound by blood and time, by sorrow, and now, at last, reunion. "I never stopped looking for you," Evie said, caressing their faces, relearning them all over again. "Not for one single day." "We didn't know," Gabrielle whispered. "We thought you were gone." "But we're here now," Walters said, voice trembling. "We're all here now." Outside, the Texas night glittered with stars, and inside, a modest police station, under sterile lights, and after decades of loss, a family began again. Imperfect, healing, and together. Finally, miraculously, whole.